The play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger and Bill Robertson. Welcome to Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger, president of Agile Marketing Partners. Alongside me, a man who's still a little bitter about not being named People Magazine's sexiest man alive. Better luck next year, Bill. The commissioner, Bill Robertson.
Thanks, Patrick. Good afternoon. Today's guest is a wonderful person, sportscaster, newscaster, philanthropist, father, husband, always has a smile on his face. And to coin a phrase that's used in sports a lot, he is now a free agent. Welcome to Behind the Game, Eric Perkins.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Patrick. It's a hoot to be here. It's an absolute joy. I've watched your program many times, and so I'm kind of aware of what's going on. I know that that you have a battery of questions here that I'll do my best to answer, but I too fell short in the sexiest man alive, so I'm a little bit bitter on that front. But you know
Next year.
Yeah, I mean, hey, why not? We have aspirations.
Well, let's get right into the questions because we have a short period of time. As Patrick and I know, this goes very fast, and we both have known you for a long time and really respect your career and what you've done here in the Twin Cities, and we know you're on to bigger and better things in the future. But 25 years as a fixture in Twin Cities television, you decided to step away. Why was this time right for you?
It was a hard decision. It was not an easy one, and one that I took lightly. And it was a lot of conversation internally with my family. And ultimately, I just got to the point where I felt more apprehensive about staying than I did about making the leap and just going without anything else. It's not that I had anything lined up. I didn't have some grand plan. I'm not going to surface on another station after my 6-month non-compete runs out. It's nothing like that. This was just an absolute leap of faith that I wanted to try to explore, and I'm super fired up about it. I've had every opportunity now to reflect on this decision, now that it's a few months down the line. I was wondering how I would process it all. Is this something I'm going to regret? Am I going to start longing to get back on camera again? It's nice to be back on camera here, but for the most part, I 100% am convinced that this was the right decision. And to answer your question as to why, there just comes a time where you evaluate and you ask yourself, is this worth it? Is what I'm doing something that I still love? And I think that may be one of the things that I didn't really talk about publicly. What I talked about publicly was, hey, this is a brutal schedule as far as trying to raise a family. I have a wife and 3 young children that are of school age, right? So not that young, but we're in the weeds right now, in a good way. And I was working 2 to 11 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday. During football season, I'd be hitting the road, traveling with the Vikings, and that 2 to 11 is a lot because, I mean, that's like they come home from school, all that stuff. You miss all the stuff that happens at night, all the practices, all the games. It was hard. And it was not just a strain on me, it was a strain on them. And so I said to myself, well, it's not just 2 to 10:30 or 2 to 11 or whenever it is, because like I'm getting a call at 9:30 in the morning, hey, Kevin Fiala just signed a contract extension. You need to get this out on social media ASAP. Yeah, you're right. And then you start feeding all those beasts, and then your producer's calling you. Hey, they want you in the 5 o'clock. What are we going to talk about? Can you get a soundbite? And next thing you know, it's not just 2 to 10:30. It's your entire day with the way that the business has changed. And so I just said to myself, it's time for a change. I think maybe the pandemic change things. Sure. I think that gave me some time to reflect, some time to pause, and some, as it did a lot of people.
Yeah, you know, it's a crazy schedule like that is something that Bill and I know all too well.
Yeah.
We both spent many, many years in professional sports. You're still on the league side. You know how demanding that schedule is, so we appreciate that.
Yeah, no, over time it kind of it saps you. It absolutely saps you. And I got to the point where you work through ebbs and flows. Every job has its share of drudgery. Am I right? I mean, even the greatest jobs on paper, you get there, there's some parts of it that are a grind. Absolutely. Every job, I think. And so I realized that, I recognized that, and I was able to work through a lot of those ebbs and flows. And if I got down on something, I would find ways to reinvigorate myself, challenge myself, innovate more, and get fired up about my job again. This last one, I don't know, it went a couple of years, and I couldn't get out of that ebb or that flow. I'm not sure which one, but it was tough.
You know, Eric, you mentioned a moment ago that the business changed. And so in your 25-year career at KARE 11, how did you see local sports reporting change?
You know, back when I started, there were some, I mean, being one of the main anchors was a pretty high profile position, and the salaries reflected that. And what's interesting about this market in particular is that it's a tough nut to crack in getting those viewers' loyalty and getting them to warm up to you. But once they do, they're incredibly loyal, and they're incredibly you can really make a name for yourself and kind of dig in. And I saw some of these people that were ahead of me, and it was a great position. What I was trying to attain was lofty, but it was great, and it was like I had always had it on a pedestal because of my dad being in the business for a long time. I always had my sight set on something like where I ended up, and over time, things changed vastly. I think people's consumption habits changed vastly, and in turn, salaries also changed vastly. And I think that over time, some of those disparities of being overworked and not always not reaching the numbers that I once thought I was going to reach from a salary standpoint changed drastically. And I think that over time you weigh those, and I think that helps spur my decision along as well.
Well, you know, as a sportscaster or newscaster in this town, those are the celebrities in a lot of respects. And I'm sure you going to the bank, the grocery store, out and about with your kids at a restaurant, people would stop and say, "Aren't you Eric Perkins from this station?"
No, it's just Perk. Just Perk. And it's never Eric, and it's never Eric Perkins. It's always just Perk. And I think that to me was always something that was just a great part of the job. And I embraced that because I knew that was part of it. And I think that one of the reasons that my persona or brand maybe resonated in this community or these communities was because I was out. I was out in them for a long time. And before I was kind of tethered to the studio anchor desk, I was in the mix. I was going to Ham Lake. I was going to Scandia. I was going to wherever else, and I was digging in, and I was telling these stories, and there were so many out there, and it was just really, I was sort of embedded in these communities, and through the storytelling and through the people that shared their unbelievable access, I was able to kind of really make an impact, I think, in this community and beyond.
Do you miss that spotlight a bit?
Oh, absolutely. Are you kidding me? I'm thrilled to be back on camera. No, seriously. If anybody that's on air in television, if they say they don't have an ego, they're absolutely lying to you. It is part of it. It is part of it. You have to have a little ego. You have to have a little bit of swagger, and you have to enjoy that process and what comes with that. I think that that's absolutely okay. Because we're performers in a lot of ways. We're entertainers, we're informers, but we're also performers.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your dad. Jack Perkins was an NBC correspondent. He was an anchorman. He was a commentator. He was the host of A&E's biography. He was a giant in the business.
In my eyes, especially, I think. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of why I got into television, and I always felt like, oh, I'll never be able to do what he did. But my gosh, he was so proud of me over the course of the years. And we lost Jack a couple years ago, but my gosh, what an impact he had on my life. And he was always on the road as a kid. I mean, I was born in Hong Kong because he was covering the Vietnam War for NBC Nightly News, and it wasn't going to put us in Vietnam in the battle zone, so we were in Hong Kong and eventually moved back to Los Angeles, which is when he got transferred to the Burbank studios out there in LA. And so he was always in it, but he was always traveling and doing some amazing work for NBC Nightly News and the Today Show and whoever else, and it was just a fascinating life that he lived, and I was always enamored by it, and would go to the NBC studios in Burbank, and just, I was a little bit of a studio rat, and whenever I could, and he wouldn't take me there all the time, but when he did, I soaked it up like a sponge, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I love television, I just love it, and I love the thought of being in it, and so eventually I pursued it myself. But he got out of television for a while after NBC, because he was with them for quarter of a century, and then he moved to an island in Bar Harbor, Maine, as geographically distant from Los Angeles as he could, with my mom, and they totally were off the grid. They were living in a solar home on an island that you could only reach via low tide. When a sandbar was exposed, you could drive a Jeep across it twice a day. It was crazy. But it was like exactly what they needed and exactly what they wanted, and they were there for about 10 years. And then, but during that time, A&E reeled him back in to host Biography, and so he would go to New York a couple times a month and shoot several of those episodes, and they made it worth his while, and it was he appreciated that part, extending his career that way, and I think he really believed in that brand and that show, and so that was good to see him kind of get reinvigorated after he had already retired to get back into it, and then eventually he moved to Florida and hung out on the Gulf Coast, which is good for me, because whenever we go visit my parents there in Florida, so I was like, oh, okay, we can do this.
We aspire to that lifestyle.
yes, we do.
I think a lot of people might. Yeah.
Well, you grew up in Southern California, and you and I have talked about this a lot, and I spent a lot of time living there as well, and you went to Pepperdine University in Malibu, and I'm guessing that was a fun lifestyle living in LA for you, and then you come to the Twin Cities, and it's what I would say totally opposite in some ways, value systems and all sorts of things, the amount of people. Tell me how you made that transition, and do you really enjoy living here now versus do you miss Southern California?
I have a lot of friends in Cali still, and I was fond of it when I lived out there. But it is crazy out there, as you know, and that traffic's crazy, and people are so in it for themselves out there, and there's just no real sense of community out there. And so while there are some trappings that are fantastic out there, with the beach really close and the mountains really close and the desert really close and the city really close, over time, you start wondering what else is out there. And I got a job in Tupelo, Mississippi after college at the NBC station down there. Shout out to WTVA. And then I got a job in Memphis, Tennessee from there. And I shout out to WHBQ. And then eventually I landed this job here thanks to Randy Shaver. And to be honest with you, Bill, like that buffer of between LA and Minnesota helped me kind of realize that there's a different pace, especially in the South.
Yes.
And that's okay, and that there's different parts of this country that are vastly different. But yeah, and so I had never experienced anything like Minnesota till I got here.
Well, I would have liked to taken a trip with you down Beale Street in Memphis.
Right? Yeah.
Have some barbecue with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had our share. That's for sure.
Eric, with your pedigree and your talents, you could have performed any number of roles in broadcasting. Why sports?
Great question. I loved sports, always. Like you guys, I was immersed in it. And as a kid, I played just about everything under the sun. I was never great at anything. I never excelled to the point where I was some heralded athlete. I always kind of like slugged my way through, but golly, I just loved it. And I think when it got to college, and I knew that the broadcasting avenue is where I wanted to go, I started to think to myself, well, why not just marry the two, and then I can get into sports somehow that way, because everybody on TV is everybody's either an ex-jock or they're a wannabe jock, right? I'm the latter. I'm the wannabe jock that couldn't make it as an athlete, and so I was happy to pursue that avenue. So I did love sports. I always loved sports, and I also kind of didn't want to follow entirely in my dad's footsteps. I kind of wanted to do my own thing and carve my own path, and I thought that would be a good opportunity to do that.
Well, besides your father, legendary in the TV business, you worked in radio and you worked in television. Who are the ones that you admire, whether they're local or national, that people you said, I'd like to not necessarily be like them because you're your own, Perk is Perk, but you must have looked at some people and said, I really like the way they do their business.
I don't know, this might not be a person that you guys are familiar with, but there's a gentleman by the name of Fred Rogan out in Los Angeles at KNBC, and he's been a long time sportscaster out there, and I interned for Fred at KNBC for a good summer, and I thought he just hung the moon. I was in awe of him, his comedic timing, his ability to make things relatable to everybody, not just to the sports geeks out there. I just thought it was just amazing, and I think he had a great influence on me as far as watching somebody and being inspired by them and being sort of a sponge of them. And then I think that, like, I look at David Letterman, and I never was able to meet him, but to not be influenced by him would be difficult, because I just think that he was just so brilliant and so it's just on another stratosphere as far as television presentation. And I think that I would say that he was probably an influence as well. And then my dad was an influence as always, because I would get a bunch of stories or a bunch of sportscasts on a tape, a VHS tape, and I'd shoot it down to wherever he was in Maine or Florida, and he would watch my tape, and he would pick it apart, absolutely pick it apart. And it was just the criticisms, or the critiques, I should say, were so welcome, because he knew everything that I wanted to know, and so I took those and I gleaned so much off of them, because he went over everything with a fine-tooth comb, and it was so constructive, and I would apply those, and I think it helped me get so much better in my craft, because I was a student.
Eric, you've covered Super Bowls, Final Fours, All-Star games. You've been to 5 Olympics, but you're probably best known in this market for Perk at Play, the segments that you created where you would try your hand at all kinds of crazy antics, bullfighting,
right.
skydiving, ski jumping.
Yeah.
You didn't come out of those always unscathed, however.
No, I didn't. No, and I thought that was more authentic. Like, honestly, if I'm going to ride a bull, I'm not going to make it look like, oh, I'm just on a green screen, and here I am. No, you got to put me on the bull and see what happens. And I think that, like, somebody said I was viral before viral was a thing. I started a segment in Memphis called The Southern Sportsman, and we would go out and we would try. It was very much an outdoors segment. I think Minnesota bound with a lot more hijinks, but staying respectful of firearms and some of these things that hunters and fishermen hold so dear. And so we would go out and we would, oh my gosh, I went beaver trapping, I went raccoon hunting, I went frog gigging, which is putting a headlamp on your head in the middle of the night at midnight. You're on the bow of a boat and these bullfrogs on the shoreline get mesmerized by your light, and you throw a spear at them, and you get. I was just like, what am I doing? This was like, for an LA boy, this was just like, oh my gosh. It was like, pun intended, I was a fish out of water. But there was something to that fish out of water mentality, like that sort of every man trying something extreme or ridiculous or something totally out of their league that always kind of resonated with me. And I put that in my, back in the bank, and I was just like, oh shoot, if I ever get an opportunity. And then I started, when I started to get hit up to do sort of random stories like, hey, come to our ping pong club, or come to our, whatever it was, rhythmic gymnastics sessions. Or like, I can't, we got to cover University of Memphis Tigers, and we got to do baseball, and this football thing's going on over here. And it's just like, well, hold on a sec. Let's just pause for a sec. There's a lot of these things happening outside that aren't getting any exposure because nobody's giving them any exposure. This is a great opportunity to showcase some of these. So we started this segment called Perk at Play. And it started in Memphis, and I did several of them down there. And one of them was on my resume tape. And so when KARE 11 came calling, Randy Shaver said, oh, this is hilarious. You got to do this here. And I was like, okay, yeah, absolutely. And so we put a pin on it until I kind of got established here. And then we unleashed the beast.
Did you ever do noodling?
I did, yeah. That was the catfish in hollowed out wood boxes or logs underneath the water. And I did that in Yalobusha County, Mississippi. I remember it vividly because I had to actually do it. And it was the freakiest thing, putting your hand inside a giant catfish's mouth and then to try to then pull it out of the hole. You couldn't do it. It was so hard. These things were massive. I noodled. I'm a noodler. No, but the Perk at Play segment, it was a monster. And it was like in a good way, because I would start to do it, and I think the more I did it, the more people got it. And they understood the spirit behind it. That I would actually showcase these great events or these games that people were doing in their backyard, but do it respectfully enough, and then also bring in a lot of humor with me trying it. And it got to the point where I was no longer having to solicit anything. My mailbox was just crushed. It was awesome, and then it became this weekly kind of segment that helped propel me through the system, if you will.
Well, that was a must-see TV, absolutely, for
shoot.
sure. It was
Thanks,
all good. And you also had a stint, many of our viewers may not know this, but you did radio for a while. And as we talked at the outset, you were in a position where you were working all day on television, and then you were coming in early to do radio as well as a morning anchor. How did that all work out, and would you do that all over again?
That was smart, wasn't it? Yeah. It was fun. It was actually that's a great medium. Radio and people that do radio, I have such respect for, because it's such a unique game. And to play in that space for the few years that I was able to do so was so enlightening and so just rewarding in a lot of ways, because it was just like another muscle that I had never been used. When you go skiing for the first time in a year or whatever, you get the next day, you're just all these muscles that you never knew you had are like sore. You're like, oh God. But that's kind of the way radio was. It was just like, wow, this is a whole nother space and platform. And it was just, I surrounded myself with some really good people, and I was able to kind of understand it quickly. And I love radio. I absolutely love it. And I love media in general. I just love playing on all the platforms. I love social media, and I just think there's so many great avenues out there for people to explore, and for people to get their word out, and I dug radio though. It was hard though. I'll be honest with you. We're get home at midnight or whatever, 11:30 or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're turning around, and getting up at 5 a.m. and driving. The studio that I was working at was by Target Field, and that was kind of haul for me. But then you get done, and then you're just like, okay, now go home quick, and then get back to work at KARE. And it was like, I remember one time, Billy Rob, where I was driving past Ridgedale Mall. I remember Ridgedale, and then the next thing you know, I was at KARE 11's parking lot, and I don't remember anything in between. And it was just like, that's not healthy. I think I just blacked out, but but like it was just that sleep deprivation that was like, it's almost like when you have a child and you just live in this state of stupor. I think that was kind of where I was for a few years. It was harsh, but we made it.
Eric, you've covered Olympics all over the world.
I've seen you at an Olympics, huh?
Yes, Turin, Italy.
Yeah.
What an incredible experience. I mean, any particularly fond memories?
Just
of your time in the
being in
Olympics?
the hub of the worldwide optics of sports was just so adrenaline filled. And the hours were stupid when you're working in Beijing or you're working in Torino, Italy, or whatever. They're comical of these hours that you're working because you're doing live shots at night for the Twin Cities, but that's the next morning where you are, and so you're always having to be aware of what you're saying of like, this is coming up tonight, but this happened last night. Wait, did it happen? No, it's happening now. It's just kind of that whole juggling process, but the Olympics were phenomenal, Patrick. It was just like, I got to do Athens, I got to do Torino, I got to do Beijing, I got to do Vancouver, I got to do London, and then I thought that would be enough, and so I kind of scaled back after that. But NBC and KARE 11 had a great commitment to the Olympics because we had so many local Olympians, and across the board, and some of them very high profile, and so to cover, Lindsey Vonn at the bottom of the ski hill after she won a gold medal at the Olympics was just that was a rush. But also because we were NBC, we were all the local affiliates were gathered in the same workspace as NBC News Channel and the Today Show, and so the Today Show had on, like, they would bring in all the who's who of all whoever was doing it. And then oftentimes those athletes would then be available for the local affiliates in a gauntlet style forum. But you'd get them for like a minute, 2 minutes tops, 2 or 3 questions, and then they'd be on to the next one. But like the access we got to some of these Olympians, from Michael Phelps to Nastya Lukin to whoever, that was phenomenal.
It's neat.
Yeah.
I'm going to go off our script for a second. One thing that I've known you over the years, the one thing I always think when I think of Perk, I think of, there's Perk at Play, that's your business side, but you've always done things with a smile on your face, and you've treated people with respect, and you must have learned that at a young age from your father or somewhere along the line, because you would come in and ask for a wild player or a swarm player or something like that, and you would do it in the most wonderful way, and you never thought like he was asking something out of the blue or out of the ordinary. And I want to say to you, I want to say to our audience, how nice that is to deal with people like that, because not everyone in this business is like that.
Well, thanks, and that means a lot. And I don't know why I always have a smile on my face. I kind of do. I've just always been like a positive person. I've always been, this is half full. I don't know. I think that there's so much joy in this world, and I just love being a positive beacon. And to work with some of these teams in this market, frankly, are fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of good media relations people. There's a lot of good athletes that make themselves accessible, and so I was always respectful of athletes' times. I would have a few run-ins. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there was times where I would butt heads with a couple people, Chuck Knobloch, Chris Carter, whoever. But those things happen. AJ Przinsky, and you just move on. And I don't know. That's just part of the job. Sometimes these guys don't want to talk, but your job is to get them to talk.
Right.
But so I was always trying to be respectful of that.
Perk, so great to have you here.
Yes.
What a terrific conversation. I wish we could have dug a little bit further into your work in the community, which I know you do a lot of wonderful things. And last question, really quickly. You ever had a bobblehead?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, thanks for joining us, Eric Perkins, Billy Robb, and we'll see you again next time on Behind the Game.